It's cold and I'm in the mood to complain, so we're gonna talk about entitled elitist music fans. Okay, that was kind of harsh, my bad, but the topic of today's conversation is going to be elitist music fans. And this is something that's been on my mind for like a couple months now, honestly, but I feel like this video is gonna be more of like a rant style. Not really a rant, because we're gonna have like evidence, but this is more just gonna be of me yapping about stuff that's been on my mind lately. So stick around for that. So people often call music a universal language. You know, it speaks when words fail, it evokes emotion that we can't really name, it builds bridges between people who otherwise like wouldn't have anything in common. We see this happen time and time again, especially now in our digital age, where with this new online third space of social media for people to come together and discuss songs and artists that they love, because it's music that's present in kind of every stage of our life, from us being babies listening to Coco Melon and Baby Shark on repeat, and the songs that define our teenage years, to the anthems that stay with us into adulthood. With so many songs and genres and artists, it's almost as if music is kind of a world of its own. But there's this undercurrent of the music world that counters its inclusive nature, and it's elitism. This video is going to explore elitism in more of a musical sense, looking at its roots, its various forms, and discussing kind of the impacts that it has on us today. Hopefully we'll be able to figure out how to turn away from these kinds of attitudes and embrace the connection of music. Before we get into all of that though, let me introduce myself first. Hi! Welcome to my channel where I talk about music and music related things that I find interesting. I like artists, albums, events, and observations that I see happening in the music world. So if that's something that you guys seem to be into, you're welcome to like, subscribe, and stick around for a little while. Okay, now we can talk about these elitist freaks. So first I'd like to define our terms a little bit if we could. What exactly is elitism? Well, Cambridge Dictionary defines it as the belief that some things are only for a few people who have special qualities or abilities. But what exactly does this mean in the context of our conversation? For us, it's more of the belief that certain tastes, genres, or knowledge is inherently superior to others, and we see this happen in real-world situations, like calling someone's music taste bad or mainstream if they like popular music, or criticizing popular artists for simply just being popular, and constantly testing people for their knowledge of obscure bands, or even popular bands. Like if you see someone wearing a Nirvana t-shirt and you're like, I bet you can't even name 3 songs, like, be for real. Because music appreciation doesn't really depend on the ability to be able to pass a music quiz. It's the elitism that divides us. It turns our shared experiences into contests of knowledge and replaces the connection that we have with judgment. We assume that certain music is just more valuable or worth more than others. And while of course there's the instance of joke songs and low effort songs, the truth is that every artist, song, and genre does hold a meaning for someone. Because music is an art, it's not a contest. It's a reflection of personal identity and experiences, and ironically, music elitism is often hypocritical. It's typical to feel judged when someone brings down your favorite band, but that's no reason to turn around and do the exact same thing to someone else. This double standard reinforces the cycle of exclusion, and it undermines the universal joy that music is meant to bring. And I'll admit, there have been times where I have been a bit of an elitist, I guess, or, you know, been like, oh, you listen to that artist? Ugh, like, I've never meant it too seriously, I think, but I feel like I do have some sort of bias to certain genres or certain artists compared to others, which I know isn't amazing, but I'm holding myself accountable. So that's something. But I feel like everyone is an elitist, at least a little bit, because you can never be a fully unbiased person. You're always gonna have your own preference. You're always gonna have the music that you like more, that you hold to a higher standard, and for each person that's gonna be different. But I think it's important that we need to recognize that so that we can work towards understanding it more, and later on maybe trying to exclude people a little bit less. But to better understand it, we really have to get into the roots of music elitism. So to further understand why this kind of elitism exists, we really need to look for its origins. And I think that this kind of attitude towards music listeners of different genres has been here for quite a while now. Like, I'm talking hundreds of years, because if you think about it, in like the old medieval days where they would have jesters and music players, there was always different genres and different styles of music. There's never just been one style of music. You know, while the kings and queens of the court would listen to more classical music, you would have the everyday citizens listening to the folk music that they made. And obviously, because of that social hierarchy, classical music was regarded as, I guess, better is a way to put it. Even though I'm sure the folk music of the olden days was much more lively than any classical music could ever have been. All of that to say, for many listeners, musical preferences are shaped early on in their lives. Growing up in an environment that's musically rich, like going to live performances such as operas or orchestras, or listening to a lot of music, or even taking lessons, can instill a deeper appreciation for certain genres. But not everybody has this privilege. Access to music education, instruments, or diverse genres is often tied to a socioeconomic class. Classical music, for example, has historically been associated with privilege and wealth, while taking private lessons, having expensive instruments, and access to experience live music in ways that most other people can't creates barriers for listeners from less affluent backgrounds. This kind of disparity can lead to forms of classism in the music community. People who grew up with access to such resources can even unconsciously look down on people who didn't grow up like them. And music has long been intertwined with social hierarchies in ways that, as classical music was formed as high art, listened to the royalty of the past, these divides are still seen today, as folk or popular music is seen as less sophisticated, or genres like hip-hop originating in more marginalized groups, they're often unfairly dismissed by listeners who just don't understand the cultural significance of it. And it's those same listeners who will praise genres like jazz or opera and even consider themselves cultured, even though all of these genres were revolutionary to music and are now accessible to almost everyone. In the current day that we live in, with being able to stream almost anything on the internet, it's so much easier to access this kind of high art music, such as classical music or jazz music or opera music. You know, you just have to go on Spotify and search up jazz music, and then boom, you'll find 500 playlists of beautiful jazz music. A lot of people, even like 30 years ago, didn't really have this opportunity. Well, not 30 years ago, maybe like 50 years ago. They didn't really have that kind of opportunity, you know, where you had to buy physical media like CDs and vinyls, which obviously you still have to buy today. Buying CDs and vinyls of probably more classical or jazz music of, I don't know about popular, but more famous artists would probably be pretty expensive, I'd imagine. And I would assume that people of those days they'd rather spend their money on something that's more popular or something that's more their style. It's now with the current music industry that exacerbates this kind of elitism more, where commercial success is often equated to a lack of artistic merit, and new breakout artists are often referred to as industry plants or sellouts. But has popularity really diminished the value of music? I mean, take artists like Beyonce, Michael Jackson, or even the Beatles. Their music has reached massive audiences, but they also create innovative and impactful work. But still, even with these artists making such different sounding music, they seem to still get grouped in a form of elitism where people don't like them simply because they're popular. And we see this manifest in many, many different ways. We see it most commonly with genre elitism, where music such as classical or jazz is often seen as elevated above pop or more common music, and critics tend to call pop music shallow or formulaic, where they ignore the skill or emotions that resonate with many people. I mean, it's popular for a reason, right? Like, just because you're making a song that seems to resonate with teenage girls, it doesn't mean that the songwriting is bad. I mean, look at like Chappell Roan or Olivia Rodrigo these days. Their songwriting is so talented, but they often get written off as just mediocre pop artists when that's most definitely not the case. Similarly though, alternative music and hip-hop are frequently dismissed due to the stereotypes of their listeners, even though they're both among some of the most complex and culturally significant genres. Have you ever heard someone say something like, oh, you're not a real fan unless you listen to this album, and then it's some like deep cut demo from like the year the artist was even releasing music? It's like, it's this kind of gatekeeping that really excludes people who are new fans of a genre or an artist, discouraging them from exploring it further. You know, it's not just fans, musicians can also fall victim to this, as they face judgment based on the extent or even the sophistication of their repertoire. It's obvious when an artist is just starting out, they're not gonna have like 5 albums released from the jump, and not everybody has access to the same resources and opportunities. I mean, if you look at artists like Clara, who just started off in their bedroom, and like, look at her now. Musicians really shouldn't be tied to how many obscure features they can get, or how early they started off, or even how many famous people they know, because it's about creativity and it's about passion at the end of the day. And obviously having these kinds of conversations on an online space, and even like in an in-person space, it has consequences that are extremely far-reaching. It affects both the listeners and the community as a whole. It tends to alienate a lot of listeners who would otherwise feel more connected through their music. Instead of being able to bond over shared interests, they feel judged and excluded, and it discourages artists from experimentation. Many musicians tend to avoid crossing over genres or new styles in fear of being dismissed from their purest listeners. And like, let's be honest, in an industry like music where it's already full of competition and financial instability with no real job security, because you as an artist could fall off at any moment, it's this elitism that adds just another layer of pressure to it, where artists, especially those in niche genres, may feel like they need to conform to certain standards to be taken seriously. But okay, headphone emoji girl, how do we combat this? You have been yapping on this for like minutes on end. You've just been complaining. How do we fix this problem? I can hear you asking, and do not worry, I have solutions for you. So first off, it is really important for us to recognize our own biases. Ask ourselves, why do we value certain music over others? Is the judgment rooted in genuine preference, or is it influenced by societal expectations? Every artist and genre brings something unique to the table, and rather than trying to dismiss an entire genre, try taking the time to give a couple songs a listen. And if you really have the time, try and understand the cultural and historical context behind it. Who knows, you might even find a deeper appreciation for something new. Some of the most innovative music comes from blending genres. I mean, in genres like R&B mixing jazz and hip-hop, or even hyperpop mixing electronic and EDM styles with modern pop. Other genres will always find ways to influence each other profoundly, because encouraging cross-genre collaboration benefits everyone, and we need to remember that music is something that's deeply personal to us. So whether someone listens to Taylor Swift, Beethoven, or even 100 gecs, their preferences are valid. Critiquing and having conversations about music is always fine, but condescension really isn't. That's really all I have to say, I think. I know that this is more of a rant style video. There was not anything specific really to discuss. Let me know if you like this style of video. Let me know if you want to see any other styles of video, any other topics. I've been thinking about doing another album breakdown, so let me know what other albums you guys have been listening to lately, what other artists you want me to talk about, maybe genres even. Remember to follow my socials at headphone emoji everywhere. I think that's really all I have to say. I'll see you guys next week. Bye!